Landlords in Massachusetts who thought they had the perfect tenant with a police officer who had a high income were actually scammed by this tenant who had multiple evictions and rarely paid the rent. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of Massachusetts. So this is a very, very interesting story because it involves a landlord, and actually it's multiple landlords who have rented to the same tenant, and they've all fallen for the same scam, essentially. Right now, the scam isn't that the person was lying about their occupation or their income, because this person is a police officer and he really does have a high income. But what they fell for was the thought that just because this person's a police officer means that you don't have to do full tenant screening on them. So these landlords, they screwed up, okay? They thought that, hey, this person, he has a high paying police officer job. He'll be able to pay the rent no problem. And he won't want to be, evicted. And, I'm going to have a good tenant. And this guy, he's a horrible tenant. He's an absolutely horrible tenant, has multiple evictions on his record, and, has basically stopped paying rent at every single place he's rented in the last like 20 years. It's a really, really bad situation to the point where he looks like nothing more than a scammer, in my opinion, okay? So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below, and let me know what you think, okay? If you're renting to a person who you think has a very, very good job, very high income, are you going to do a full tenant screening on them like everyone else, or are you just going to take their word for it and just, hope for the best, okay? I'm going to let you know right now, I don't hope for the best with anyone. Now, let me tell you a personal story I have. I have a home that, it's a little bit higher end home here in Omaha. And, I used to live in it myself, and I turned it into a rental after we moved out and moved into our current home. So some of the applicants I had, it was a family of where the husband was a doctor, okay, a medical doctor. And I verified, his income and everything. He made great money and he had a great job, but I didn't believe him. Okay, that was the thing, right? I still did full tenant screening on him. I still looked at his credit history. I still looked at his eviction history, because these things are important. Doesn't matter if you make over $200,000 a year if you can't pay your bills on time. Now, does it? And you know what? The people in this article, they are finding out that right now. Okay, they should have done their screening. So this is really a lesson that other landlords can learn, at least small landlords who think that word of mouth and trust are more important than your proper tenant screening tools. So anyway, let's get into this article. This article is coming from NBCBoston.com, and it says, "Deadbeat on the beat. High-ranking cop stiffs landlords, racks up unpaid debts." The NBC 10 investigators discovered a high-ranking officer with the Stoneham Police Department has a history of evictions and unpaid civil judgments, despite a steady six-figure salary. Experts say the issue raises credibility questions and has a negative impact on public trust. Yeah, and it definitely makes me question, how is he able to still be a police officer if he's doing this sort of thing? But anyway, let's get into the article. Detective Sergeant Robert Kennedy has spent more than 2 decades working for the Stoneham Police Department. His steady six-figure income apparently isn't lucrative enough to pay the monthly rent. "It just baffles me how it could go on," said Ron Gifford, one of the police officer's former landlords. Gifford rented a Woburn home to Kennedy and his wife years ago, but the details are still fresh. Excited to have a police officer as a tenant, the landlord did not do a background check before offering a lease. Gifford now describes that decision as a mistake. On 2 different occasions, Gifford and his wife, Elizabeth, initiated the eviction proceedings for unpaid rent, according to court records. The couple said Kennedy would come up with some cash to put a dent in the arrears and talk them out of moving forward in court. So yeah, they made the mistake. They saw the guy, the police officer, the high income, and they thought, oh, we're good, we're good, we're good. No, you are not. And if you had looked at his eviction record, you would have seen all of the previous evictions. If you had looked at his credit history, you would have seen that, hey, this guy's credit is garbage. Okay. And it's worse than garbage. I mean, it is gutter level. And, there's no explanation for it. I mean, I don't know if this guy has a gambling problem, a drug problem, or just a spending problem. You don't have to have necessarily a gambling or a drug problem to have money issues. Okay. You can just spend more money than you make and not pay your bills. And that is, I mean, it's bad. It's bad. So let's continue. It was bad right from the get go, Gifford recalled. The rent was always late. I always had to call them. They always had excuses. It was just a constantly chase them, chase them, chase them. Eventually, the Giffords reached their financial breaking point and followed through on eviction proceedings in 2008. They took possession of the property on Pearl Street and won a judgment of nearly $6,000, according to court records. Speaking from their Florida home 15 years later, the elderly couple told the NBC 10 investigators they are still owed the money. It was very disappointing to believe a police officer would do something like that, Gifford said. Now, I don't know how local departments do things, right? But I can say how the federal government does things. And simply put, I am reinvestigated. Basically, my background investigation is redone for my law enforcement position every 5 years. Okay. So if I come up and, I have all these unpaid civil judgments and I have all these debts, bad credit, and they look in there and they say, hey, this guy is a national security threat. We can't give him his security clearance. Then I lose my job. But obviously, local law enforcement doesn't work like that. Okay. I don't know if people are reinvestigated locally or not. I don't know how that works. So, and it might not be necessarily a disqualifier either to have, substantial amount of debt if you're working on paying it off. But I do think it makes you a liability to the department. And, especially when you start reading newspaper articles about one of your police officers who basically is a scam artist. Okay. Pattern of evictions. After getting a tip, the NBC 10 investigators found the Giffords' experience is far from an isolated incident. In early 2020, Kennedy and his girlfriend moved into a Stoneham apartment complex. Within months, they stopped paying the rent. While many people lost work when COVID raged across the country, payroll records show Kennedy earned more than $187,000 from regular wages and detail assignments that year. Once the pandemic's eviction moratorium was lifted, the landlord took them to court in June of 2021 and won a judgment of more than $24,000. Records show Kennedy, representing himself in the case, filed several motions to stay the eviction but was unsuccessful. Kennedy and his girlfriend then moved to a different apartment complex in Reading in October of 2021. A similar pattern quickly emerged. So yeah, this seems to be their pattern. Okay, the pattern of this guy where he moves into a place, doesn't pay rent, gets evicted, moves into another place, doesn't pay rent, gets evicted, and this has happened multiple times over the years while he was working as a police officer. And you know what? This gives law enforcement officers a bad name. That's why I say, his agency should really be taking a look at him and saying, hey, do we want this kind of person out there on the beat? Okay. And in my opinion, no, I don't think so. But I don't know. I don't know how their union rules work. I don't know how their civil service rules work up in Massachusetts. And like I said, I don't know how their backgrounds, etc., work. But this looks bad. This looks bad for their entire agency. By December, the landlord had already started eviction proceedings for unpaid rent. This time, when the case concluded, the judgment was more than $30,000. Over the 3 year period when Kennedy and his girlfriend were evicted from two different properties, payroll records show the NBC 10 investigators reviewed show he made roughly $531,000 as a Stoneham police officer. I'm sure he knows exactly what he's doing, Gifford said. He's got away with it a couple of times, and this is a good thing. I'm just going to continue doing it. The NBC 10 investigators found eviction cases dating back 20 years, nearly as long as Kennedy has been employed in Stoneham. The only gap in time when he seemingly wasn't stiffing a landlord was after he purchased his parents' Stoneham home in 2012. Despite a relatively modest mortgage of less than $2,000 per month, land records show Kennedy fell behind on payments. When he filed for bankruptcy in 2015, he was $18,000 in arrears, according to court documents. So, yeah, this guy actually, he declared bankruptcy in 2015, it says, right? So, my thought is whatever he's spending his money on, wherever all his money is going, he is just horrible with money. He's bad. He is really, really bad with money. Okay. And can't pay his bills on time. His credit is shot. I mean, if he declared bankruptcy, I mean that shows you right there just how bad things were. And he owed $18,000 on a home he inherited from his parents. I mean, give me a break, okay? You can't even pay for that. You should have just sold the house, in my opinion. But whatever. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the house got foreclosed, okay, and that's why you're renting again. But yeah, I read this story like this, right? And this is a warning for landlords out there. Please do proper tenant screening. Don't trust that just because a person, has a good job, has a high income, that they're going to be able to pay your rent. Okay, you need more than that. And a good tenant screening. I should mention, I've heard the stories about lawyers even who don't have enough money to pay rent, and then they make the eviction process last for years on end so that they could stay for free in apartments. And you know what, I don't want that to happen to any other landlord.